power. Absolute power. The power to make war or peace, to suppress ideas, to transform society. This was the power of the Russian Tsar. In the Age of Enlightenment, the call for liberty fueled revolution around the world. But in Russia, the power of the crown crushed the people's will for change. By the 20th century, the Russian people were no longer willing to serve an absolute monarch, and the land of the Tsars faced the fires of revolution. On the very day he took power, December 14, 1825, Tsar Nicholas I turned his guns against revolution. Rebels in the army, the Decembrists, had threatened the new Tsar's right to absolute power by demanding a constitution for Russia. Nicholas treated the insolent rebellion to a taste of Tsarist rule.
He crushed it. What it did do, though, was to frighten him and to persuade him for the rest of his life that there was a real risk of revolution in Russia.
Nicholas exiled the rebel rank and file to Siberia. The ringleaders of the Decembrist rebellion he sent to the gallows. Under Nicholas, the Tsar's absolute rule became Russia's official creed. He declared democracy or a constitution out of the question.
I have never thought that any system could be better than that by which kings were delegated by Providence to govern the masses.
In the Russian Empire, politics was illegal. There were no legal political parties. One could not write what one believed. One could not discuss ideas. One could not discuss politics legally, or one was taking a great chance. Politics was driven underground into secret, small cells.
Russia's elite still wanted their share of power. Aristocrats, intellectuals, and entrepreneurs all dreamed of changing society.
They were humiliated by Russia's backwardness. They didn't have the same political rights that upper-class people had in England or France.
Even to discuss rebellion was a crime. The secret police enforced the emperor's will with exile and execution. Only one man dared to publicly express the universal longing for dignity and freedom. Russia's great poet, Alexander Pushkin.
The heavy chains will fall. The dungeons crumble at a word, and freedom will greet you at the gate, and brothers will give you back the sword.
In a land where self-expression could be a crime, Alexander Pushkin was a national hero. But on January 27, 1837, the rebellious voice of the Russian people had a fatal appointment to keep. The poet had challenged an officer of the Guards to a duel. The Guardsman had flirted with Pushkin's wife. Honor and reputation were at stake. And in Tsarist Russia, a man's honor was more precious than life. The great poet's death was a national tragedy. Still, it was only a drop of blood compared to the tragedies to come. While political change was suppressed in Russia, outside the empire, revolutions were already shaking the ancient order. In Western Europe, the Industrial Revolution was booming. Nationalism, socialism, and democracy followed in its wake. In 1848, popular rebellions overthrew aristocratic rule in cities from Paris to Prague. When the tide of rebellion toppled the Austrian emperor on the very doorstep of Russia, Tsar Nicholas struck back. Russian troops marched in to put the Habsburg emperors back on their imperial throne. Royalists regrouped, crushing revolts all across the continent. Tsar Nicholas was proclaimed the gendarme of Europe, the cop who kept Europe safe for monarchy.
The idea of a mighty, powerful, overwhelming Tsar to act as a bulwark against anarchy was very much in the centre of Nicholas I's mentality and his conception of his role.
The Tsar's faith in Russian power now bordered on arrogance. As his reward for saving the rights of kings, Nicholas turned his eyes on Turkey and the Balkans. The Tsar dreamed of extending Russia's domain over the remnants of the dying Ottoman Empire. In 1853, the Tsar's forces attacked the Turkish Balkans and Black Sea ports. Russia's grab for control of the Ottoman Empire set off alarms in London and Paris. England and France rushed in to prop up the Turks. The Crimean War was on. For Russia, war with the Western powers would be a rude awakening.
The Crimean War showed that Russia actually was not as powerful as people had thought, not as powerful as its own rulers had thought. The English and the French fight and move with the technology of the Industrial Revolution. That means the steamship, it means the rifled musket, it means the railway. The Russians fight and move with the technology of the pre-industrial era.
Ill-equipped, underfed, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, the Tsarist military machine Nicholas had come to believe was invincible was thrown back. Trapped in trenches, Russian troops waged a losing battle.
This was the Russian army that had defeated Napoleon. They had an inflated sense of the strength of their own army. There had been decades of deterioration in the army, which really only became clear during the war itself. They were resting on their laurels militarily.
Before the Crimean War, Russia was considered the greatest military power in the world. Now, Russian troops were dying on Russian soil.
There's tremendous shock that they were not able to win that war. It's considered to be a terrible disgrace. A terrible disgrace.
February 1855, abandoned and attacked by the monarchs who had recently sung his praises, Tsar Nicholas reviewed his troops under a cold, driving rain. The next day, he came down with pneumonia. 1 week later, he was dead. With the empire in crisis, the burdens of the crown fell to Nicholas's son, Alexander II. The new Tsar had learned from his father's defeat in the Crimea. Alexander faced up to reality. He conceded defeat and called home the troops. He had new battles in mind, a war with Russia's past. Tragedy, humiliation, crisis. Defeat in the Crimean War made it clear that Russia had fallen behind. Russia's old ways, her army, her economy, her society, needed to change to catch up. Steam and steel were transforming the world. But in Russia, change was forbidden, unless one man led the way, the Tsar. As he came to power in 1855, Russia's new Tsar, Alexander II, took a clear-eyed look at the job to be done.
By then, the Industrial Revolution has begun to affect Western and even Central Europe, and it hasn't really begun to affect Russia. In general, it's perfectly clear to the rulers that the whole system is impossibly backward by the standard of the leading powers of Europe, and therefore fundamental reforms have to occur.
In the first years of his reign, Alexander pardoned the Decembrist rebels, abolished corporal punishment, instituted trial by jury, relaxed censorship, chartered new industries,